basis of that critical mass. And
He's in favor of it.
And the voice of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The other point you made about connectivity and all this other stuff. I just wonder what we're not seeing now coming down the future. As we look towards. I mean, I didn't see any of this connectivity stuff happening 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if you did, but I didn't see it. I wonder what it will be like for us in the air, in the super premium part of either business jet or first class cabins in 15 years. There might be stuff out there that we just don't know about. Anyway.
Thank you. From the point of view of commercial flight, if you go from Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.4, you might cut the flight time by about 40% or so. But that's only part of the travel time. You've got to get to the airport, and even if we ignore TSA and security and all that, you've got to get the baggage loaded onto the aircraft. You've got to get the aircraft out onto the runway. And then when you get to the other end, especially transatlantic, you've got to get the baggage off the aircraft, go through customs, go through immigration, and then get from the airport. So if you're lucky, you might cut your trip by as much as 30%. Is that really worth the extra cost?
Yeah, that's just a great question. And also, I think it complicates Bill's question about, greater utilization, fast, just getting from point A, it really does. Door-to-door time is radically different. Now, 1.4 is just the Aerion product. Boom promises 2.2. We'll see again. The other problem is windows. You might get faster to Heathrow or Tokyo or whatever, only to find that you can't turn around quickly because it's 3 a.m. In other words, we have airline schedules that are fiendishly complicated by when you can access airports, not just because of noise regs, but because of when people want to fly and whatever else. So, I remember a couple of years ago, many years ago, 15 years ago, Boeing had a program called the Sonic Cruiser, which Airbus quickly designated Chronic Snoozer. And it was, it promised, Mach 9.8, and just sort of we're in that very fluttery transonic part of the regime. And the more you looked at it, the more you realized it did absolutely nothing for utilization. So there are so many complications to the speed value equation, as you're saying. Absolutely.
Taking your point about connectivity to its logical conclusion, do you see a tipping point that might change the structure of the market? You say the cream of business class travel is funding coach, right? Well, does connectivity lead ineluctably to some kind of dramatic decline in business travel?
Oh yeah, that to me is fascinating because the FAA did all sorts of studies on that in the 90s, as did various consultancies, and we were virtually certain that this greater connectivity would reduce. It was taken for granted circa 1994. Here we are 24 years later, and actually I'm very happy to say we see the opposite effect, and maybe it gets back to your point earlier on about maybe just greater connectivity is a stimulus to greater connectivity, global trade, world travel, any of these things. That's my hope. Now, but you also use the term tipping point, which makes me scared. It could be maybe there is this point where we have this sort of real instant connectivity coupled with hologram meeting rooms, and anyone who's been in a virtual environment, we've all experienced some degree of virtual or augmented reality, but imagine if that's scaled up and instant and global. That scares me as a potential tipping point. I mean, it really does. In other words, so far, the data doesn't show it at all, but it could be because we haven't gotten to something that really does threaten the cream of business travel.
I would add that that would mean changing cultures a lot of the time. So one of my friends works for a Japanese company, and while she doesn't necessarily need to go to Japan all the time, they want in-the-face meetings, right? So she often finds herself on a jet there. There will always be this presumption, and this may change, but in my opinion, at least in my generation, there will be a presumption that you want to meet face-to-face, depending on how sensitive the topic is or what we're dealing with, especially when you take into account privacy and cybersecurity concerns.
Okay. We probably have time for one more question. Apparently, you guys are very thorough. Oh, Matt?
Yeah, so just a quick question on how much appetite is there among current lawmakers on getting this change through? What does the legislative landscape look like? And perhaps the correlate, right? Who are the enemies? Is it still an environmental lobbying issue, or are there other interests at stake?
Well, from what we've seen, one of the major allies is Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee. He put forward an amendment that would lift the subsonic ban, or the supersonic ban. But in every one of the FAA reauthorization bills that I've seen has had an amendment added to it. So I think it is very likely in this Congress to pass, whether it is by September 30th or is pushed out. Chairman Thune said that they would get it through by the end of the year. As for enemies, I haven't seen very many lawmakers out front in front of the issue saying we shouldn't do this. In part because it's baby steps. It's a plan for the FAA to create a more logical plan around this type of technology, and so it's primarily been about environmentalists saying we shouldn't invest. Like even when they have voiced opposition, it has been primarily aimed at investors within the technology. So they go after like Richard Branson for giving money to one of the airframers for creating the technology, rather than a full stop on resurrecting this type of technology. I'm very optimistic.
Great. Well, give Alan and Richard a round of applause. That was a great panel.
Thank you, Caleb, for moderating. We now have a reception out in the lobby, which will finish up at 11:30. The next panel starts here promptly at 11:30. I don't know, I couldn't help admire. I think Alan wins an early award for the best socks of the conference so far. But thank you. Yeah.
Did it on purpose.
Well done.